The weirdest medieval sports. In the DreamWorks movie, The Road to El Dorado, we see the two main characters playing a ball game against their Mesoamerican hosts that involves trying to shoot balls through a hoop high up on the side of a wall. The game continues all day until the sun's shadow reaches the bottom step of the temple. But what you might not know is that this was based on real Mesoamerican ball games played from 1650 BCE up to around 1600 CE. While there were numerous variations, surviving vases from the Mayan civilization often showed players with painted faces and bumping the balls with their hips to score. While this game sounds like a lot of fun, it represents only one of many truly unique sports to emerge from the medieval era. Let's take a look at some today. Army mock battles and tournaments. As a type of sport, the tournament emerged in popularity on the European continent in the early 12th century. The armies of Normandy, England often took part in mock battles in order to prepare for the real thing. And to make it more fun, they turned the whole occasion into a sport. Basically, it was a lot like modern-day LARPing. These battles were also one of the few ways that landless peers and knights could rise through the social hierarchy through displays of skill and strength in the mock fights. Like a real battle, there were few rules, and so it often gradually descended into organized chaos, with subterfuge and shady tactics on both sides. Knights could be injured or even killed in these displays. By the 13th century, these mock battles had become even more elaborate, dramatic affairs, moving from open fields to town centers. In 1331, for example, the Cheapside tournament took place. Edward III and his favorite knights dressed as Tartars and led their ladies using silver chains. Mock battles were turning into more like festivals, where individual knights would showcase over-the-top elaborate heroics for the benefit of the crowd. By the middle of the 15th century, the mock battles were less reminiscent of warfare and more reminiscent of a stage play. The sport had become a theatrical performance, often involving storylines, costumes, and audience interaction. Falconry, or hawking. The medieval upper class liked to display their wealth in any way possible, not too different from today's upper class. One way they did this was by acquiring expensive falcons and other noble birds, including peregrines, lanners, and various species of hawk, to use in the sport of falconry or hawking. The richer the noble, the more of these birds they may possess. They required extensive training before they were allowed to fly, sending them to track and kill specific prey as the humans galloped along below, taking part in more of a spectator sport fashion. Of course, the winning bird would lead to praise heaped upon the owner, as if they had personally killed the prey themselves. Tennis. We all know tennis, a court, a ball, and 2 to 4 players with a racket each. But did you know that way back in the 15th century, tennis used to be a far more painful and weird sport? A favorite among the French elite and bourgeois, tennis was similar to the version we have today. Only tennis balls weren't quite as fancy as they are now, and were just usually pieces of cloth packed tightly and sewed. This version of early tennis originated in monasteries and villages in southern France, way back in the 11th century. Originally, they called it jeu de paume, literally translating to game of the palm. That's because instead of the rackets, players would use their own hands. Imagine literally smacking the ball with your open hand. Ouch. This video was brought to you by Established Titles. Instead of being treated like a lord, do you often feel more like the court jester? Historically, in the beautiful Highlands of Scotland, anyone who owned land was called a laird, lord, or lady, regardless if they presided over 1 square foot of grass or acres of ground ripe for a mock battle. And with Established Titles, you've earned your right to join the upper echelons of society and set your own falcon on anyone who doesn't recognize that you're a true member of the gentry. Every title pack gives you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land that you can call your own, with a unique plot number emblazoned on the framed certificate we'll send you. Officially change your name to Lord or Lady and jazz up your social media, credit cards, and plane tickets by adding your title to them so everyone recognizes your new social rank. For every order, Established Titles will plant a tree and help preserve the picturesque woodlands and biodiversity of Scotland. They work with the global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. Right now, Established Titles is running a massive sale to celebrate Father's Day. It makes a great last-minute gift that he'll love. Use the code SimpleHistory to get an additional 10% off. Visit establishedtitles.com/simplehistory today. Icelandic horse fights. In Iceland, a popular but rather weird sport took place throughout the medieval period all the way up to the 17th century. Horse fighting, or as the Icelandic people called it, hestavíð. What we know of horse fighting mainly comes from offhand remarks in the epic Icelandic sagas, making it difficult to know quite how exactly it took place. It appears that they most commonly took place between summer and early autumn, according to one source, and were usually between two stallions of good breeding. Horse fighting could only occur if both owners consented. They would then send invitations out across the district, with many turning up to spectate. The whole thing would be turned into a big event, with people setting up food and drink stalls and other forms of entertainment. For the horse fight itself, usually a nearby paddock would be cleared so people could easily gather and watch the action. Sometimes, like modern wrestlers, they'd place the horses in categories like young stallions to decide which would go up against which. Then, finally, the horses would fight. The owners of the horses would choose a helper, called their second, to be in the paddock with the horses on their behalf. The owners would then prod them with sticks or staffs that would cause the horses to rear up and clash against each other in a vicious battle of hooves and teeth. It could last for hours, until one of the horses either collapsed due to exhaustion or succumbed to its injuries and died, at which point the spectators would cheer and celebrate, because who doesn't love beating a dead horse? Knatleikur. Knatleikur was a Norse ball game played from antiquity to the Middle Ages. It involved a ball, a stick, and seemed to be usually played on a field of ice, although there are reports of it being played in summer too, suggesting it didn't have to be icy for the game to commence. What we know of Knatleikur comes from epic sagas, so how the game was played exactly has been lost, but we can ascertain it was played one-on-one or involved many players, and like a lot of things in the medieval era, was often reduced to violence. Many historians such as Ebbe Hertzberg and Bjorn Bjarnason liken it to lacrosse, with a stick used to catch and hurl the small hard ball. There are many descriptions of players deliberately aiming for each other and causing bruises or injuries, suggesting it was most likely played with a ball made from wood or tightly packed leather. Generally, there didn't seem to be a huge amount of rules to Knatleikur. Instead, it seemed popular to throw the ball with the aim of hurting the opposing player and allowing the game to quickly devolve into a violent wrestling match, where everyone walked away bruised. In true Icelandic fashion, the entire time spectators would watch, drink, and holler at the players, and even get involved in the brawls themselves. Naval tourneys, or naval jousting. Jousting is the most famous of all medieval sports. It involves two knights on horseback galloping towards each other with long lances, each attempting to unhorse their opponent. But what is less known is that there was a naval version of jousting. As described by Thomas Beckett's biographer William Fitzstephen, naval tourneys were very similar to the jousting we all know and love, but played on the water instead. In one format, two opposing players would face off in small vessels holding a lance. A shield would stand in the middle of the river on a post, and the player would attempt to hit it without splintering his lance. If he failed, he'd be thrown off by the weight of his own hit, and usually end up falling and emerging downriver, coughing and sputtering. In another format, similar to the classical rules, two opponents would joust against one another from the bow of a small vessel, with the intention of sending the other crashing into the water. In either circumstance, it seems like the people prepared for this eventuality, with watchers poised in boats, ready to snatch up any of the submerged competitors as soon as they appeared downstream.